The Ghost of Vicarstown Yard. Based on the new railway series by New Controller 1 and Tom the Train Fan. Written and adapted for audio by David. It was a late evening in October on the Oakham Road line, and Jordan was waiting with Joe. The two tank engines were being prepared to arrange some trucks in the yards outside of Vicarstown to be picked up by the midnight goods. While they were waiting, Leo was telling them one of his old stories. This one in particular was the story of the Ghost of Vicarstown Yard. And they do say, Leo finished, that when the mists are high, you can see the bright lights of the wandering engine, but has only been seen on misty nights, just like tonight. Whoa! Jordan shivered. Stories like that are enough to make my frames quiver. Stuff and nonsense, huffed Joe. I don't believe in things like that. Honestly, he went on, hissing steam. The way you talk about it, it makes you all think they actually exist. Don't count your coals before they're burnt, Leo warned. They may come for you one of these days, and don't say I didn't warn you. Joe harumphed loudly, and he and Jordan set off for Vicarstown Yards. All the way there, Jordan kept thinking about Leo's story, much to the annoyance of Joe in particular. Eventually, they arrived at Vicarstown Yard. This yard was bigger than the one at the big station, with vast sidings of trucks of various types and sizes. Normally, this yard was shunted by two diesel shunters, but due to one of them being called away to the mainland and the other for repairs, the yard foreman had arranged with the new controller to borrow two engines to work in their place for the evening. As the two engines began work, the mists were beginning to slowly rise. Jordan was beginning to feel slightly nervous, but Joe, on the other hand, was still stoic on the belief that ghosts didn't exist. Jordan's just going soft in the boiler, he huffed. I don't know, remarked his driver. Some people have claimed to have seen ghosts. Like there was this one tale in particular of an engine that fell off an old iron bridge into a marsh and was never seen again. Pah! Joe snorted. But between you and me, he was beginning to feel secretly nervous. The shunting was almost complete, when suddenly they heard a faint crackle, and the whole yard went completely dark. Eek! Jordan screeched. What happened? The power's out, his driver replied. The fuse box for the power supply to the floodlights must have blown. Joe was on the other side of the yard. He was feeling bewildered. I can't see a thing, he complained. We can at least try and find where Jordan is, replied his driver. He must be somewhere round here. Jordan moved slowly forward and started to navigate his way through the maze of trucks. He was somewhere in the older section of the yard, where some buildings from over the years that have gone still stand, derelict and empty. As he passed a row of old buildings, they seemed to take on ghostly shapes in the mist, groaning and creaking as if they were alive. And as Joe drew closer to an old goods shed, he heard a faint creaking sound, which slowly grew louder. Who's there? He challenged. Nobody answered. There's no such thing as ghosts, he muttered to himself. But secretly, he was beginning to have second thoughts about this. He trundled over some points when he suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Come on, Joe," said his driver. "Don't just stand there." But he was too scared to move. Look! He stammered. In front of him, in the mists, were bright white lights, which slowly started to move towards him. "It's the ghost of Vicarstown Yard!" he yelled. "He's coming for me! Help!" His voice could be heard from all over the yard. But just then, as the lights were about to come into contact, the yard floodlights burst back on. And there, standing in front of a petrified Joe, where the ghost seemed to be standing, was Symes. He had come from the main line to collect the trucks to add to the midnight goods. Jordan heard the noise and hurried over. "Symes!" he sighed with relief. "Am I glad to see you?" "Same to you," Symes smiled back. "But what on earth's the matter with Joe here?" Jordan looked across to Joe, who was standing where he was, absolutely petrified, and nothing his driver and fireman could do would make him move. "The poor engine's scared out of his wits," Symes sighed. "But then again, after spending so much time in the dark on a night like this, wouldn't anyone?" "At least it serves him right for his boasting," Jordan chuckled. "But I'd better help him home all the same." He then coupled up and then towed poor Joe back to Oakham Road, while Symes stayed to collect the trucks for the midnight goods. Joe did not sleep very well that night, but after a day or two he gradually got over his fright and apologized to Joe for his arrogance. They had a good laugh about it in the end. But Joe never forgot the night that nearly sent him crazy.